And here we go, data day, another day from Australia. Today, we're going to talk about some different aspects of the market. We're going to talk a little bit about flatbed, the fact that rates are rising, but yet freight is not, and all that other kind of good stuff coming y'all to data day. Sales chatter, here we go. Gents, we got Dean from Australia again, Jeff Dickinson from Joyzy. Dean, Jeff, how you guys doing, man?
Great.
Great to be with you.
We just had a great conversation off air about kangaroos, wombats, armadillos, hogs, all sorts of different countries. Dean's got the little dot going on when he does a certain thing. It looks like he's got snipers coming in at him.
I don't know where this light's coming from. This is weird.
It's one of those things where it's just like, you ever been there and you kind of look down, there's a red dot on your chest?
Yeah.
Like, what the hell is that?
It's like, why are we talking about this, guys? I mean, just because we eat roadkill, I mean, come on. Seriously.
Hey, you know what?
Just kidding, guys. We're not doing that.
Indecisions everywhere. You know, look no further than the squirrels on the street for indecision. Indecision kills, boys. Let me tell you that. And Dean, I was giggling because Dean was telling us, for everybody listening and watching, about kangaroos and how at nighttime when your light hits them, they run towards the light. And it's kind of like raccoons, right? Like, and you got deer that kind of run towards light or freeze in the light. And I was actually blown away, everyone, and I know this has nothing to do with data day, but for me it's huge, that in the outback, if you drive a car like a 4-door sedan, you actually got to put a push bar on the front to protect your radiator and headlights because kangaroos will literally run at your vehicle. Dean, to me, that is still blowing my mind, brother. Imagine seeing a Ford Focus coming down the street with this huge ass pro bar in the front. You know, when the horn honks, it goes na 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 na. You know what I mean?
Most of the people that live out there, you know, that's sort of standard operational procedure. But you often see some rental cars with tourists, and they'll invariably be broken down on the side of the road. So when you roll along with 3 or 4 trailers on, you've got no other option than to get a big strap out and tie them to the back of a truck 200 feet behind you.
Well, I hope they get extra insurance there, Dean. God, when you go get a rental car.
They will. The tourists will tell you that it's one of the wildest experiences of their life, being towed by a road train into the nearest place. Because when you break down anywhere in the outback, you're at least 1,000 miles from civilization. That's if the heat and snakes and other stuff don't get you first.
Don't go there, folks. Do not go there.
So, Dean, I had a question for you because I spent a lot of time in Jamaica as a kid.
Right.
And when I first got to Jamaica, I had no idea. But as I spent more and more, I think it was almost 3.5 months I spent there straight. And more I started to realize you can really point the tourists out because when they're going to turn, the wipers are going. Because everything's backwards. They sit on the, you know, so all the everything. So is it like that in Australia? And I know, excuse my ignorance for anyone watching that's like, Deigan, are you fucking serious right now? But is it like that where like you're on the other side? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Well, it's more obvious, not so much with the wipers, but they are on the wrong side of the road typically. And
no way.
Because
you watch kangaroo, you got to watch out for tourists too.
So we drive on the other side of the road, and I went for a drive in a truck last week. It was wild. I just jumped back in a big Kenworth, and it was like I'd never left the road, just because you're changing gears with your left hand instead of your right hand.
Yeah.
But it comes back to you really quickly. I didn't miss a beat. But for a lot of tourists, they'll come over here and kind of play chicken because they don't realize. Because when you get tired, what happens is your muscle memory kind of reverts to what you have been most used to, which is driving on the other side of the road. Yeah. I do the same thing here. My navigation said turn right, and I turned right into oncoming traffic the other day.
Because I can see that.
When you come out of a rest area, you turn left here, not right. You've got to go across the road to turn right. And it was late at night and I was tired. So what you've got to be careful of is when you get tired, that's when your brain flips back to what you would normally do, and it's deadly. So tourists, what they do is when they get tired and they're driving, they'll somehow come out of a truck stop or a rest area on the wrong side of the road. And because there's nothing you might not see a car for 100 miles, they just continue to drive on the wrong side of the road, and they'll be coming at you playing chicken. And like the rule in the outback is the bigger vehicle stays up on the road, because a lot of the roads aren't wide enough for 2 vehicles. So you'll be sitting there with 3 trailers on and 2 decks of cattle on each trailer, and you think, yeah, I can't move. I'm not moving. And the sad part of this is that every year there is a horror story about how 4 young tourists lost their lives because they collided head on with a road train. It's almost like clockwork every single year. So that's the sad part.
That is sad.
Yeah, that is. You know what? You are right though. When you get tired,
yep.
You tend to. I remember vividly as a kid, I was exhausted coming home, and I had a buddy in my car. And we pull up to a light and it's a green light. So I'm going to go turn left. So I'm turning and there's traffic coming this way. And I just turned and this guy missed my bumper by a foot. And I'm freaking out. I'm like, why is that guy turning? And I look back and I'm like, oh, he's got a green light too. Because you're going north and south. Why would you not have a green light? My light's green. It's just your brain kind of shuts off. So I could see that happening, especially in North America. We turn right. We're going with oncoming, going with traffic, the right flow. Well, I can see that happening pretty quick.
When the Olympics were on in Sydney in 2000, they had to paint all of the footpaths with special signs so that the pedestrians looked left instead of right, because they would walk into oncoming traffic on the sidewalk. It was such a big problem. Yeah.
So do Australians call us idiots?
Septic tanks. Rhyming slang for Yanks.
Yeah. I love it. I love it.
Septics.
I knew there was a nickname. I knew it.
Don't tell anybody, please.
No. It's fine. In town, we call them idiots. People that come from the city have no idea how to ride on country roads. Right. And I'm like, oh my God, there's another idiot on our snowmobile trail.
Yeah, right.
So don't worry about it. I'm all good. And anyone who doesn't like that too, that don't watch. So
rhyming slang is huge down here. Rhyming slang is a very big thing here. Cockney rhyming slang in particular. So we have lots of code words for things.
So tell us some. Before we get into that, can you tell us some? Are you able to do that? Or
if you wanted to go into a bakery, you'd ask for a dog's eye with dead horse, which would be a meat pie with tomato sauce.
Wow.
Or if you wanted to kick someone in the rear end, you'd kick them in the Bull Eye Pass, which is a famous road in Australia.
I love that.
Yo, better watch out. I'm going to kick you in the Bull Eye Pass.
Bull Eye Pass.
Yeah.
I'm going to use
Cockney rhyming slang from the 70s is fascinating. There's a whole book on it, but a lot of people use it down here just for fun.
It kind of reminds me of, I don't know if you ever seen Shoresy, and I know it's be a horrible. Okay, so that's slang in Northern Ontario. Hey dear boy, and the way Shoresy talks, it's total Northern Ontario, like totally. So that what you were just saying reminds me of it, because you say it so fast. Everybody that you speak to in that area knows exactly what you're saying, but other people are like, "What? What did he say?" Because even Jeff was like, "Huh?" You saw him lean in. He's like,
"Hey man, that's like going down to Louisiana in the bayou. They have their own language down there, their own language." And they understand exactly what's being said, and you're like, "What the?" I mean, you don't understand that at all. I mean, there's no common sense to it, but it's common down there. I mean, seriously, it's unless you hear it, you wouldn't believe it.
Right?
Yeah, and unless you're almost like you got to hear it a couple of times in order to be like, "What the heck was that?" Like
you got to watch their body language, because their body language tells you more than what they're saying. It's completely the opposite. It's unbelievable.
All right. So now that we got
data, let's get the data.
Dean, what do we got? Dina, Chief Creeper. Sorry, Dean. I apologize. I'm trying to make an Australian slang out of your name, and it's not going to work. It's just not. It's Australianality. I don't know what it is, but
I've been called a lot of things. Don Crack. Don Crack is one I got a long time ago. Dean Cork. I get a lot of them.
Dean Cork.
Cork. They always get it wrong. So how do you spell your last name? Croak? No. C-R-O-K.
Ribbit.
Right. Yeah.
Jeez, this show just went off the rails, boys. This show is what do you call it, Dean?
Hey, it was a good show, guys. I'll see you next week.
Yeah, that's it. So, Dean, what do we got today from a data perspective, brother?
Yeah, a couple of data points I've been tracking. One that's starting to look like a trend, and that is the tightening of capacity in flatbed against the backdrop of declining demand. So in last week's show, we talked about how drilling rigs were down about 20%. Home starts were down. There's just, and it's the quiet season, the cold time of the year, not a lot of activity in flatbed. It is always like this. That's no surprise from the demand perspective. But since, actually over the last 12 weeks, rates have risen consistently. They're up 15 cents a mile in the last 3 months, which is, I just find that fascinating. And it kind of tells me that the exodus of capacity from the industry is starting to bite in some of the specialized sectors. And I think refrigerator's one of them, to a lesser degree, but flatbed mostly. And I think that's, and I think that makes sense for a lot of us listening and pondering this thought. It's the hardest, most specialized part of the industry where you need the most equipment, the most investment in things to tie down loads. It's the hardest in winter. So possibly this could be some carriers migrating to other modes of transport away from the coal to maybe dry van or reefer. But I think there's a tightening of capacity in the refrigerated sector that's worth thinking about as we head into this quarter, deep into this quarter. There were some markets that I watch in particular that are a little bit of a tell for me, like Baltimore. Baltimore was the number 2 spot market last week, traditionally not a big market. It's the number 1 port on the East Coast for roll-on, roll-off machinery. Yep. We're still 2 months away from the peak in machinery imports into Baltimore that typically go to the Midwest. Imports are up 8% in December, month over month. That's the break bulk, not containers. And there's been a surge in flatbed volume in Baltimore. Rates are up 14 cents a mile in the last 2 weeks. They're averaging $2.40, whereas the national average is closer to $2. Maryland state average rates at $2.54. That's excluding fuel. The second highest in 7 years. Texas started to show some improvement last week. Montgomery is normally our top freight market in the state. It's home to a lot of lumber and steel. It reported tight capacity last week. Rates are up 14 cents a mile to $2.51. Another big flatbed market, Arkansas, rates up 21 cents a mile last week to $2.22. Year over year, loads moved, not loads posted, loads moved are about 10% high. 27% higher in Arkansas. Spot rates are about 10% higher. So the volume of freight moving out of there is much higher, and so are the rates. So it's not just the cold weather, because year over year volumes are up substantially. So I suspect there's something going on in flatbed that might be catching a few people trying to buy flatbed capacity by surprise. Our forecast for rates in flatbed is I won't say flat, but it's starting to show some upward inflection towards the end of February, early March. So it looks like there's a tightening of capacity there. But against the backdrop of some other data points, we're still not seeing a lot of strength in building new orders for manufacturing. Just went through their 16th month of contraction. The ISM Purchasing Managers Index down for the 3rd month in a row. So, and I'll quote Jason Miller here. He said, while logistics providers don't want to hear this, we aren't seeing any signs of manufacturing improving over the next few months. This suggests continually muted freight volumes. And he urged everyone to disregard predictions of a market turnaround in the truckload sector in late Q1 or early Q2. So that's sort of what, we've been tracking that thesis for quite a while. That's no surprise there. But what is surprising is that spot rates are going up for the flatbed sector against the backdrop of weakening demand.
Yeah, something, Dean, last week, just going back to that, in Houston, big market for flatbed, huge. We were down 33% with a 2% up charge on rates. How does that look this week?
Houston. Wow, I'll have to pull that up. You'll have to fill while I quickly pull that up. Houston's market.
And that was on the spot market as well.
You'll have to fill. Jeff, you should have mentioned this off air. So talking about putting him on the spot, brother. You know what I'm saying?
I'm coming to you from the outback of Australia.
That was the spot. And I believe that the contract was 36% down with 10% down on the rates. If I remember correctly.
Yeah, I've only got spot rates here for flatbed. Houston, $2.11 per mile. If I look at Houston, $2.11 per mile, they were flat. They were $2.11 down from $2.13. So they were down 2 cents on the spot market this week. They have retreated from, at the end of the year, they were at $2.19, Jeff. But if I go back and look if I take out the pandemic, they are sitting. They're sitting about 10 cents a mile higher than where they were averaging in 2019. But the data point that is interesting when you look at the volume of loads, are sitting compared to 2019. The volume of loads are sitting about double where they were in 2019. And that's got to do with the switch in imports to the Gulf Coast, particularly break bulk, right, in flatbed. I assume you were talking flatbed, Jeff.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. So there's still a lot of volume coming into that area. I just did a piece on the Fort Worth market this week. I think it's becoming a massive distribution center. What's interesting is a lot of its volume comes out of Houston. A lot of break bulk comes out of Houston into there. Fort Worth's, it's a growing market for a lot of carriers. I think Texas is becoming a really balanced state. I looked at the volume of loads in and the volume of loads out, inbound, outbound, and it's almost identical in that Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex. Houston's much the same. So they're good markets for carriers and brokers to get in and out of. But rates are certainly, much higher than where they were. They've settled much higher than 2019. So,
which is actually a good thing. They've settled higher because 2019 was a bloodbath, right? So
yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah. I've only got a 5-year view on rates, so I can't go back to 2018. But they started off.
That was my next question for you, Dean. Was where were we at 2018? Because that was more of a. I remember when I met you in 2019. The conversation was pay no attention to 2018 or 2019. You have to go back to 2017 in order to get. And it was. I remember at the PCA event because Dan Einlaff was from Challenger, and he was saying, hey guys, listen, you can't take these metrics and for gold because it's so convoluted that. And now when we look at it, we're talking probably 5-6 years that's been convoluted in some which way, shape, or form, right? So.
And 2018 looks normal. Like 2018-19 looked like fairly normal, benign cycles. There wasn't a lot of volatility.
Yeah.
So if you look at the ups and downs, not a lot of volatility there. Sorry.
No. Don't be sorry. I just wondered if we can jump back to Jason Miller's comment about, and kind of dive into that a little more for people, because I think that's going to really put things into perspective. So I was operating with the modus operandi that we are looking at a turn kind of end of Q1, beginning of Q2, mid Q2. So Jason Miller's actually predicting that this is going to be extended. What is what is that extension? Like, is he thinking 2024 now? Is he give us a little more insight in there?
Yeah, Jason's theory has long been that when interest rates start to show meaningful cuts, that we'll start to see a change in business investment, single family housing, construction, just construction in general. So he doesn't think there'll be any cuts until before the middle of the year. I think I'm right. I'll have to go back and check exactly. I think the Fed said they were talking about cuts starting March. He doesn't see that happening. So, and they've already delayed one round, I think, while I've been away, one round of interest rate cuts. So that'll be the economic stimulus that he thinks will start to trigger a turnaround in the market. But I think
I can see that
when you talk nationally, I've always said no one's home at the average. And some people on LinkedIn were talking about that this week, some of our competitors. And it's right. When you look at average rates, averages are made up of highs and lows. But when you go regionally, most trucking is regional. And when you dig into the regional rates, I think there'll be some really interesting movement in the market, just like we've talked about with flatbed. If national flatbed rates are going up, you want to bet that hotspots like Arkansas and Montgomery, Alabama and Medford, Oregon, they're going to show some pretty steep increases in rates because I just think the capacity is starting to decrease overall, but in particular in the specialized areas. I think if I was trying to buy capacity in anything that was specialized that took a lot of money to buy, I probably those carriers wouldn't have been spending that money necessarily at the start of the pandemic because all the money was in dry van and drop and hook. So I think that's why we're seeing pockets like out in some of the produce markets moving far more than the national average, is because there's fewer carriers in those markets. There was fewer carriers during the pandemic and there's fewer carriers now. So I think you're probably seeing a little bit more tightness regionally, maybe in some of those 5-digit zip codes. So I think that's what I'm looking for is, as I looked at the numbers this morning, guys, the total number of carriers leaving the market. We're on track in January to have about 2,000 fewer than last month. So December was kind of a peak in the exits out of the industry. That's when the number of trucks at auction hit a record high, the highest since June 20. we lost 35 carriers in the last quarter of last year, but probably picked up, maybe 25,000 carriers. So
there is a net 35,000, picked up 25.
Yeah, there's a net loss over that period, but the rate of exits has slowed. I think that's the important point here. Diesel has dropped, rates went up in the first half of January. It's given carriers a buffer. If they broke even in terms of operating costs and profit margin, if they broke even at the end of December, at the end of January, they're making 8 cents a mile, right? Because diesel's gone down and rates went up because of the cold. But I don't know that that's going to affect their long-term profitability, because even though the spread between profitability and costs, margin and costs and rates widened, they would have done fewer miles in the last 2 weeks because of the cold weather. So I think that the data would tell us that we're past the worst of the exits out of the industry, and all the capacity that was going to leave has left. That's what the data would tell us. But I've still got another day to go in the data. I've got one more day in January to pull the data from the government to see what the number's going to look like. But that's sort of what my gut tells me when I look at the data regionally and at a market level and a specialized equipment level. It just looks like it's tightening more rapidly in markets where there's more specialized freight required, specialized equipment. Sorry.
Interesting.
Yeah, and Jeff, I'd like to get your take on this. I can tell you over the last probably 4 to 5 weeks, more and more from my prospecting, I'm getting, we're very slow. We have a pool of carriers we're trying to spread the wealth to, for lack of a better term. Please check back in a couple of months. And I'm finding there's been a huge uptick. Now, don't get me wrong, that was the kind of the sentiment across the board, but I'm finding a major uptick in probably the last 4 or 5 weeks in that. Jeff, what are you seeing?
Yeah. With my customers, I'm definitely seeing, I see it on my board. I'm up 152.72% from last year's numbers at this specific time. So something's going, inventory is definitely moving. There's more truckloads for sure. Dean was talking about, down in Louisiana, Alabama, specialized flatbed moves. We're going to start moving a lot of stuff in that specific area, hotbeds, next week. And the rates are moving up to Dean's point. But the inventory levels, they're saying that it's going to be a very flat warehousing season throughout the whole year, where they're decreasing their inventory, but there's not a lot of shipments coming from that. Which makes a lot of sense. Less inventory, less moves, but you're not going to see a tremendous amount of gains like we saw. We talked about it last week, when we had the uptick in the New York, New Jersey area, the Houston area, and we're starting to see that shift go back out to the West Coast. So we're seeing some shifts. And we talked about this some time ago, Dan, Dean, about our predictions for this year. When is it going to happen? And from everything, including Jason, he basically said that he didn't see anything at that time that was the aha moment that's going to change the predictions. And so we're going into the third quarter. I would say into the third quarter.
So I think you're right, Jeff. We'll see seasonality take effect in some of the hot markets. When Yuma transitions lettuce production back to Salinas, for example, that'll start to pick up, and that'll be a very hot market. So I think there'll be very small pockets around the country where there'll be some.
Florida with the perishables. Florida, March, April, June, shrubs, plants, going up into the Northeast, into Michigan. We'll probably see that happening, where there'll be a lot of logistics trailers being needed down in that area, especially Homestead area, Miami area, in that where the big farms are. We'll start seeing.
Well, the Plant City Strawberry Festival started yesterday.
Yep, there you go.
That marks the peak strawberry season in Plant City in the Lakeland freight market. So this is typically when you start to see northbound reefer rates start to increase during berry season.
Yep.
So it's kind of marks the unofficial start, but you've got to get into April. I will sort of add another bit to my thesis about spot rates, because I think there's two areas of capacity. There's contract capacity, large carrier contract freight, and spot market capacity. A lot of the exits out of the industry have been in the spot market, the smaller carriers that have been exiting. What's interesting is when I look at our contract rates for flatbed, the replacement rates for RFPs are coming in at 13% lower in the second half of January versus the first half. What it tells me is that capacity is exiting in the spot market. There's fewer carriers, spot market capacity is tighter, but for longer term dedicated contract freight, there's still an excess of capacity, and those rates are coming down still. Now,
you know what, to your point, and I'm just thinking logically here, you know, with less freight, there's more consolidation. Right. So with that, you would see that boost coming from that, where they were doing multi-stop. You know, you might see more increase in multi-stop because they don't have the inventory to go direct to the end user, so they'll do multiple stops along the route. I mean, I do a lot of that right now, and I don't see any flex in that going to full truckload. Right. So I think that's going to stay in the market. In many markets.
Yeah.
Because I move a lot of furniture, you know, floor-loaded furniture, 15,000, 20,000 pounds, light as hell. Truckers love it because it's not a fuel burner. And, you know, I don't see any reprieve in that. I still see multi-stops still moving forward for the next several weeks or longer.
Right. So I also see there's a huge uptick from what I see in the people I speak to, where smaller carriers are focusing more on in-house customers as opposed to load board freight. So that could be also a downticking from the load board perspective. I think, you know, when COVID and then the huge steep kind of drop off the cliff scenario, like when I was out in BC talking to a lot of the carriers out there, I was like, well, where does generally your freight come from? Like load board. And I'm like, is that a good business? And like, no, we need to get out of it. But it takes time, right? They have to get sales rolling and all that. So there was a huge consensus, and the more and more suppliers I speak to, because one of my pieces of my puzzle is I find asset carriers that need help, and I sell to that help, right? So, and I'm finding more and more that are saying, if there's something we can do, I definitely want to do it. Because I don't want to play in the spot market anymore. During COVID, spot market was an amazing place, like huge amounts of revenue.
Let's go.
But I know. And here's the thing, right, Jeff? Long-term business decisions can't be made on spot rate.
And that's what you're seeing, you know, and Dean, you'd be able to answer this better than myself, but with less inventory, there's less being put on the spot market because there's really a need, right? Because they're going direct. They don't have all this excess that like I can't handle. I need some capacity to handle A, B, and C, you know, but I don't see that happening. I think we're going to see a decrease in the spot market. You know, if the inventory remains the same, I think that's what's going to happen. It just seems logical to me.
The counter to that would be that if capacity is exiting at a faster rate in the spot market side of the industry, that those rates could tighten for those ad hoc moves, right? Those last minute moves. So if you're thinking about buying capacity and you know that contract replacement rates are still going down and back into the double digit decreases, that would tell you that there's still opportunity to buy capacity at a lower level in the larger fleet contract market, as opposed to the spot market where capacity is exiting at a faster rate. That's what it looks like. It's kind of unusual.
I still see the gap between contract and spot is really thin on a lot of these lanes. I mean, there's not like $1,000, you know, difference between spot and contract, because that vacuum effect, you know, over the last several months, you can see it. It's been sucking those contract rates down, and they've been just like flat, but very close to spot on a lot of lanes.
It's interesting, Jeff. It's down on van. It's down to about a 40-cent gap nationally, and it was 50 cents for probably all of last year.
So I got a question for you guys on that, because it sparks something of interest. I mean, typically we run in cycles, right? So your
Yep.
January, February rates are pretty cheap. Then freight rates start climbing, and we haven't seen any of those cycles. And I know, Dean, you've said many times before that typically contract rates are about 6 months, 4 to 6 months behind spot rates. But if there's no variation, then all of a sudden that gap narrows and it stays consistent, right? And I'm wondering if that also plays a piece, like a piece in the entire puzzle, if you will, of contract rates. Because right now at this point, spot rates would typically drop more in this time, but they've risen, where normal Januaries they drop. So then you get that 50, 60 cent mark, but they haven't. They've actually gone up, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's, and to me, I look at it and I start, one of the biggest puzzles in my head, and I'd love to be a fly on the wall for Jason, like with Jason Miller, just to see how he analytically does all of this. But in my head, I sit there and I go, how can you ever figure out or even come close to figuring out like what's going to happen? There's so many things that typically happen, like just take January, for example, that haven't happened.
Right.
And we can go back decades that this happens, and it's not happening this year. And it's like, what else is not happening, right? It was like kind of when you guys all know this, because the three of us spoke about it many times, where seasonality never kicked in for Christmas. It was just like a steady flow. There was no huge spike. And, the question then becomes, are we, and I don't know if any of us, I know I can't, I don't know if you two can, are we at the new normal?
No, I don't think so. For now, it seems that way,
I know, but what's going to be?
It's going to change. Another thing too that we didn't talk much about, and sorry, Dean, I should have asked you this before the show, but
you never do that, Jeff.
Yeah, I do sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes. But we should take a look at reverse logistics. We don't talk about that much, and this is the season right now. We all know that, because of the big selling or somewhat selling during the holidays and everything. This is the return season. This is the consolidation, the reverse logistics part of the industry. Right. If you're talking about seasonality, this is it. This happens all the way through.
Are we able to prepare for that next week, Dean? You think you can bring some data to that?
I'll have to do some research. We don't have any on our end. It gets sort of mixed up in the wash of freight moving because it could be a part load. It could be a multiple number of returns built into a full load.
Well, so why I asked that, it's really simple. We used to have truckloads of that stuff that was coming back, and it was just like two ships passing each other in the middle of the night. And then we got smart and we said, you know what, let's create a consolidation center and bring in the small shipments to the center and then run a line haul, reverse logistics back to the shipper. You know what I'm saying? Because now you can create a truckload instead of having all these multiple LTLs that are moving all over the place. Because that's what happens. It happens all the time.
And then people actually buy those truckloads.
Right. So I think with that, if you think about it logically and you're saying, okay, if there is more consolidation, they're doing exactly what I said, you would probably see the reverse on the backhauls coming back into the shipper and it should be an uptick or it would be a drop. If there's less material being returned, more LTL. If there's more, then you'll see more truckloads because they're consolidating it.
So I got an idea for the three of us. Why don't the three of us gather data and next week we'll bring it to the table?
Okay.
Deal? Done.
Yep.
All right.
Let's do that.
Thank you, Dean. We appreciate you coming to us from Australia. We understand the time difference, and it's probably very difficult for you. Thank you, Jeff, for being here again. To all you watching and listening, take that data and go do something with it. Don't just digest it. Really do something with it. Listen to these experts that are talking here. Dean and Jeff have some amazing advice and suggestions. Take it. Y'all go with it. Make every call educational and crush your sales.